as I like to do a little bit of preparation, just a little bit for these conversations, I was doing some research around particularly what the professional coaching bodies say around maintaining presence and being focused during a coaching session and, you know, giving your whole self to your coaching client and all that good stuff. And probably the ICF has the most specific guidance as far as its competency framework is concerned. So if you'll bear with us, I thought just to kick things off, I'll share their definition. So first of all, they give this kind of broad description of it being fully conscious and present with the client, employing a style that is open, flexible, grounded, confident, which is all good. Confidence crops up quite a bit in this, so that might be something we could unpick. But it goes into more detail to say, you know, a coach who maintains presence remains focused, observant even, empathetic and responsive to the client. They demonstrate curiosity. They manage their own emotions. They demonstrate confidence, there's that word again, in working with strong client emotions during the coaching process. They're comfortable working in a space of not knowing, and they create or allow space for silence, pauses, or reflection. There's quite a lot going on there, and it all sounds fantastic, of course, but how do we do all of that?
I think I might be the classic example of how not to do it. When I turned up to the meeting late, I had to turn the laptop on because it had not been used all day because I was using a different laptop. So I think there's that prep, isn't there? So there's like a physical, practical prep. And then I think what we're really talking about is that mental and emotional prep. So understanding that there are acts to do, that preamble, call it what you like, that work up to a coaching session. I think that's really useful, in the same way that we've referenced previously that we often post-session have to have some form of decompress or wrap up or kind of moment of pause and reflection for ourselves. It kind of mirrors, there's the pre-element as well. So I guess that's helpful to think about it like that it is part of the coaching session, the preamble.
Yeah, that preparation beforehand. So I would agree with that completely. I think you're starting off on the wrong foot by rushing from one thing straight into a coaching session if your aim is to be present. I guess just to throw it out to perhaps Lou and Ali and as well yourself, Louise, as well. If we have this pre-session, what are we preparing then? What do you do in that time before a session that helps you be present in a conversation?
For me, there's a lot about removing distractions. I am very, very easily distracted. So I have to clear the physical space. So there's nothing, whether, you know, I mean, I have a list of stuff to do on the day, you know, it's actually removing that because I will get distracted by it. So it's removing that stuff. It's things like when I've been coaching in, let's say, a virtual environment, and I've been in an office and there could be people going past outside. I'll have to sit myself so I'm not facing the outside because I'll get distracted by people walking past. And I think, oh, where they're going, which is not the best. So there's a bit about where I position myself when it's virtually. It's making sure emails are, the email thing is off. So again, that I'm not distracted by pop-up. So I think there's a bit for me about there's the physical space that I create.
Yeah.
And then it's also just thinking about, you know, depending on how many sessions you're in, it might be just revisiting if I've kind of made some notes, you know, where did we finish last time? What's the piece of work with this client? And again, it's very much their agenda, but it's okay. Let's take me back into that place where they are. So for me, there's that, it's just that bit about the removal of distractions and reminding me that this hour is focused on that. And maybe if there is something that's coming into my space, it helps for me to write it down and think, right, I'll come back to that later.
Yeah. It's an interesting one about the virtual space because, you know, it's a topic for another podcast, I guess, you know, coaching face-to-face versus online. We all do it now online because that's what we were forced to during the pandemic, and it's kind of become the norm. But there is definitely the temptation to have more distractions, isn't there? Because you've got a screen, a lot of things going on. I've got 2 dogs, which is always a constant worry that they bark when I'm doing this podcast recording, for example. People knocking on the doors. There's all sorts of things that can crop up in a face-to-face situation as well. But online, yeah, the temptation to have your own things around that can distract you could be heightened. Lou, what about your preparation that helps you?
Well, yeah, I was just thinking about 2 kids, 2 dogs. So for me, it's the same. I'm just always, especially if it's an important meeting, client meeting, work stuff. Yeah, being disturbed. I think for me, being present as a coach, it's really important to open the door on the client and then close the door on the client. That's the way I kind of approach it, because you can have lots of clients, or I certainly have had over the years at any one time. And so for me, opening the door and closing the door is really important. In terms of opening the door, it's obviously looking at their notes and just getting prepped mentally. What's the goal? Who is it? What are we focusing on? And then there's my own mental preparation. Getting in the zone, the coaching zone, whatever that may be, and reducing distractions, as Ali's mentioned, whatever they may be, dogs, kids, whatever. This might be a bit far out there, I don't know, but for me, in terms of getting prepared and present, I do some really weird sort of qigong kind of energy exercises that just help align left and right brain and the meridian system, and that I know helps me kind of just get in the zone. So that's something I've always done. In fact, I do it all the time at the beginning of meetings if I need to present or speak or whatever. So that's a little tool that I do personally to get in the zone and be present. And one of the other key things I do with my clients is clear the space at the beginning of a session. So I'll together we do that, and I'll say, what is it you need to leave at the door today? Or I might use clear the space as a terminology, and that's something I've always done, really, and we both do it. So it just kind of clears the decks. Sometimes it's a physical thing, they might need to move. Sometimes it's a mental visualization that they put emotion in a balloon, that kind of thing. So those are the first things that sort of pop into my mind as we talk about presence.
Nice, yeah. Because one thing, which before coaching I probably wouldn't have necessarily engaged in is mindfulness, which is kind of ubiquitous now. It's become very, very common. But as somebody who probably just shouldn't have been good at coaching, because you say you're easily distracted, Alison, like it's a real struggle. And the only time I'm not distracted is when I'm coaching. But I think I've learned through things like mindfulness, and don't get me wrong, I'm not an expert. I wouldn't be able to, I'm not a practitioner of these things, but I think it is a good sort of mental workout for, noticing when your mind wanders and bringing your attention back, which is kind of one of the key things that you do in meditation and mindfulness. And it's a bit like going to the gym and working that muscle, isn't it? You get better at it and more practiced at noticing, the mind has wandered again, but I'll bring it back again. So that worked a lot for me. And even if it's just a 5-minute mindfulness thing on YouTube, you don't have to pay for these things or be an expert in them, just something that, I like your phrase, opens the door, Lou, for you as the coach, as well. Anything else, Louise, that you do as far as preparation is concerned?
Yeah, I think similarly to Lou, and I've not been practiced or trained or anything like that. I'm not disciplined enough, but breathing. So literally, I will literally count my breaths in and out, and I'll know to regulate my breathing, to slow my heartbeat down, and just to really find a much calmer zone. And that might be because I'm feeling stressed, or I just know that it's just helpful to role model that then with the coachee in front of me, the client in front of me. So definitely breathing for me. And I think the more simplistic that we can make these things, and the quicker we can make them kind of real bite-sized things, then I think you're more inclined to do them. So I'd love to be able to have, wonderful proper breathwork exercises and some of the things that Lou has talked about, but I haven't. But what I have got is some real simple deep breathing exercises that can be really useful. So I think it's just that. It's just inserting those mindful pauses. There's been a lot of research, I don't know whether you've seen on LinkedIn at the moment, that kind of, they've done the brain imagery, haven't they? When people go from online meeting to online meeting to online meeting with literally no pause, or the barest minimum of a pause. And the brain pattern and energy colours differently, doesn't it? when you've had a break, or versus back to back to back meetings.
Yeah.
So there's definitely the science in there that says insert some kind of pause, and whatever we choose to call it, it doesn't really matter. The fact that we're doing it and practicing it and role modeling that with others and having a bit of a discipline around it, I think has got to be a good thing really going forward.
Yeah, and there's a really good word there that you've used, which is discipline. And it's almost the hygiene stuff again, isn't it? I know we used that word quite a few times on previous episodes, but making sure that you're organised, have got the time, you're disciplined. What you then do with that time before and after a coaching session could be wildly different, but making sure you've got the time sounds pretty fundamental.
Finding what works for you, I think.
Mm.
But also, I think it's encouraging your client to do that as well. Is around the letting them come, and but Lou's thing obviously that she uses around what do you need to let go of. I love the idea of the balloon. That's really good. But yeah, it's finding what works for you, because it's not going to be the same for everybody. I find I say kind of almost doing a bit of a mundane task before, and then I kind of come back in the room and I'm kind of entering that space, just that little break of doing something that I don't need to think about, and then I come in and then I focus.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess if we check the box for preparation, and we've put the time aside, we have our chosen method, whatever that might be, for just getting in the zone, as you called it, Lou, for coaching. I guess then it moves us into the coaching itself, and there are a whole host of completely human reactions that can happen for a coach. Something that triggers a thought or emotion in you, or a memory, something that's being shared. So I'd like to move us on to that, because I think that's particularly tricky, especially for new and developing coaches, to not get drawn into their own narrative or their own thoughts and feelings when they're hearing somebody else's situation or context. So I know I've experienced that a lot. Firstly, is that something that's come up for you guys? And secondly, how do you deal with it, would be my question.
Yeah, I mean, yes, all the time. We get triggered, especially if it's a goal that we can relate to, or a subject matter, a topic that you get triggered by. I think you have to be really careful as a coach that you don't try and go into saviour mode, and want to rescue them. And I think it's something to be really careful that we don't take on somebody's stuff as well, and we leave the session and it's kind of hanging on us. We're sort of taking that on and can't let go of it. So yeah, I think all coaches to some degree would experience this. Do I was thinking about this and how I stay present in a coaching session. I think reflection's a key thing afterwards, to reflect on the session as you're writing up your notes. Is there anything I need to release before I close the door on that client? That's important. And this might be a bit mad, but I'm a doodler, and the science behind doodling as well. But I doodle all the time, all day, every day, when I'm focusing or concentrating. People might assume it's the absolute opposite. When you're doodling, you're just not focused, but it's not the case for me. So when I'm in a meeting or a coaching session, I'm a doodler, and that helps me. There's something about that. Probably need to look into the science behind it more, but it helps me stay on track. It helps me keep focused. So that's my little secret tool that I don't ever really share. But yeah, if you look at my desk, it's full of doodles.
I use, and it's possibly keywords that the coachee has used, or the client is, and that kind of helps, I'm going to say, with my focus. But as I said, I can get easily distracted, but it's kind of bringing myself back. And I think you can get distracted by stuff outside of the coaching session, but you can also then get distracted by what the coachee says, and then you're kind of like, oh, there's that, and there's that. But it's almost letting that go to make sure that you're listening. That's kind of really key. So sometimes just writing a key word that they've said just helps me focus on, whether it's around what the goal of the session is, or a recurring theme that helps me sort of focus. But it's a constant kind of inner talk of leave that, let that go. And and that bit about trying to remember it's their stuff and not your stuff. And whilst you might have had similar experiences, it's that they have to come at it from their angle. Someone's used the analogy with me before of like the glasses. You'll see things through your lens.
Yeah.
And mine might be rose tinted or grey tinted or whatever. It's actually seeing it. It's coming at it afresh from their perspective, because their perspective of something will be very different to mine. So it's always, I guess, kind of making sure that your thoughts, but also then what you say, isn't in any way detracting them.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's that fine line, isn't it? Because we want to be responsive to what we're seeing and hearing, but then we don't kind of want to get drawn into it or dragged into a certain route, when actually our role is to try and stay within a certain kind of sweet spot, so that we're allowing them to move around the space, so to speak. So we're not falling into a predetermined path or journey that you say this, they say that, there's another question, and hey presto, we've solved the problem. Well, that's not what necessarily is required in that session. And to stay quite fluid, I think, can be quite tricky, because you want to be responsive and tune into them, but not to the point where it becomes a barrier to that conversation or that further exploration. So and I'm not sure, and I know we're here to kind of say, this is our advice, this is our top tips. It's only advice and top tips because actually we need to find our own kind of way within that, don't we, in the way that we are and communicate, and certain strengths or talents we might have in the coaching zone and whatever, and whoever's in front of us. And always, we're human, aren't we? So actually sometimes we can focus really, really well, and then other times, no matter what tactics we've employed pre-session, it just might not work for us that day. So it's also being a bit kind to ourselves that we can be fallible, and we can have kind of bumpy sessions as well, and that's okay, because what's been received has still been good enough for the coachee in front of you. So I don't know whether that's helpful, but I'm just looking on those ICF pointers, and it's quite clear, isn't it? It's quite like, do this, demonstrate this, and it's like, oh, okay. But we're dealing with humans, aren't we, all the time? We're human. So
I think there's that bit as well when they have the strong when people have strong emotions. So if people get upset, it's sometimes my natural tendency inside is, I'll say, give them a hug or whatever, but you kind of have to I'm going to say retain that focus of what my role is. My role isn't to console you or to save. That's it. It's just to let it happen. Don't brush off what's happened, acknowledge it, and then it's for them to them to say, okay, well, where do we go now? They might want to stay with that emotion, they might not. That's not for us to decide. But it's not getting drawn into the emotion. That's something that I found hard before to do.
And for me, again, this comes back to another thing that I think coaches talk about a lot, is the difference between empathy and sympathy. Do you know what I mean? Being able to just take an objective perspective, withhold judgment, rather than sympathize, because that's where we're getting drawn in emotionally as well. I think the thing about reflection as well, because we did touch on the pre-planning, but the reflection afterwards and supervision, by the way, as well, I think is really key in just being able to, again, the word objective crops up a lot, doesn't it? But being objective about actually, was the distractions there? Were there triggers? What were the reasons for them? That raises your own level of self-awareness, so that next time you can be more adept in the moment at dealing with it. Because, and I know, Lou, I think I'm right in saying you took a lot of your training was centered around the coactive coaching model. Mine was as well. And I was looking back at that today. Is that right, Lou?
No, mine was David Rock.
Oh, David Rock. Apologies.
Mine was coactive.
Was yours coactive?
Oh, Ali coactive. Anyway, I look back at that because just in the lead up to this, because the coactive for me, the most useful part of it was the area around self-management. There's a big part of self-management about it. And there was I'd forgotten that this was sort of written. I hadn't read the book for ages, but there was quite a, and this might help some people listen to this who think, oh, my attention wandered or I lost focus. The reality is that will happen at some point, sometimes fairly regularly, depending on what's going on for you and the client. Again, with practice, you get better at dealing with it. And the advice that that the authors of the coactive model offer is what to do in that circumstance is just to be honest with your client and share the fact that you lost focus for a minute or distracted, or that what they've shared stirred something in you, but that you're going to put it to one side and continue to work. And I think that's quite sage advice, actually, if we're trying to build a mutually respectful two-way relationship.
Brings the human element into it, doesn't it? It's
Yeah.
And do you know what? I was just thinking as you were talking, sometimes the best thing we can do if we're truly not present, something's, cropped up, there's been a bit of a drama, whatever in the family, sometimes the best thing to do is cancel the session. It's okay to do that as well if you need to, and you really are not going to be in a good place. The best thing you can do really for yourself and for the client is to postpone. Not always easy to do, of course, if it's private clients and stuff, but I just think that's worth mentioning.
That's a really interesting one. That I have I guess the point I've got to in my practice, because we've all got a certain amount of baggage going on at certain points, and in some cases it's really extreme. Sometimes it might be deemed as quite trivial, but there's always stuff that could distract us. I sometimes find a coaching session where my job is to give somebody else my attention for their topic is quite what's the right word? I don't know, a release. Do you know what I mean? Like I actually can forget about everything else I've got to worry about for the next hour. Now, maybe that's just a point of maturity because I'm more comfortable with that now in terms of where I am and the amount of hours I've coached for and all that sort of stuff. But it's been quite a good mindset shift to think, actually, for the next hour, I can completely focus my attention on someone else. Do you know what I mean by that?
I love that.
That might sound a bit weird, but I don't know.
I think you're right. Probably comes as you become more comfortable in coaching, but it's a really, really valid point. Yeah, it's almost I can just forget about my own troubles and focus on something. I always find as well, not always, but often, that I get really motivated by what they're talking about or the actions they're setting, and I end up leaving more often than not buzzing about. I might try that, or it motivates me, inspires me to make positive changes, and that's what I really love about coaching, that it rubs off in a positive way, not so good when it's negative and you end up carrying this, negative stuff around, as we've mentioned. So, yeah.
Well, that's the other trigger, isn't it? I think when we say triggers for stuff, our brain automatically thinks of a heavy emotional topic or something like that that's going to, stir something in us. But it could be the complete opposite, couldn't it? It could be something that triggers a real positive thing in us as well, which is great, but it also could be distracting, I suppose.
And I think there's a link there, isn't there, to almost kind of role modeling some of that stuff. So we kind of feed off each other. We get the energy buzz, and that's great, and we can build off that. But I was just thinking something, Stephen, when you were talking about from the coactive perspective, actually acknowledging to the client this, oh gosh, that was a trigger, or I'm just taking a moment just to pause and process that, or whatever. I think that's quite a healthy thing to role model, because actually that's kind of what we're trying to encourage the coachee to do, is to self-serve and understand how they can use strategies and pause and kind of recognize their own needs as well. So for me, that's all part of that bigger learning and development that's going on in that real kind of two-way relationship that we have with coachees, when it works well, and and things are kind of dynamic and constructive. So I quite like that idea of saying, gosh, okay, I just need to just sit with that or process that for a few seconds or whatever. And something else occurred to me when I was watching all of us talking. We all concentrate and pause in different ways, and it's almost like you can see a real intense moment of focus and concentration almost playing out in a physical way as well. So I quite like watching that and learning from that and working with that as well.
Yeah, that brings us to something that I had written down first, but I thought that's a real skill-based thing, and let's talk about more the behavioural self-management stuff. But I think it's really valid. It's inspired by the coactive stuff. This isn't a sales pitch for coactive coaching, it's starting to sound like it, but that idea of 3 levels of listening, the level 1, everyday listening, we're not really listening, you just listen for your opportunity to talk. Level 2, you're listening a bit more intently, but you're still forming your own thoughts and ideas. Level 3, you're listening for what's going on with the other person, but it encompasses body language and the environmental factors. And I think that's what you're talking about, isn't it? You're reading what's going on in areas of grey, not just the words that are coming back at you and stuff like that. Yeah.
I think it's using your there's that bit about your intuition, about when you're observing, and that bit about what you're seeing and what you're hearing, but also there's that bit of intuition. And I'm not sure if it's linked into coactive, but my coach tutor always used to say the question in your head should be the one on your lips, and sometimes it just might, and it's because if it's there's almost a bit of let it out, because it's kind of there and it's been prompted for a reason. So yeah, that just came to mind. So I thought I should practice what I learned. It's in my head, I'll let it out.
So in an attempt to sum up where we got to with the conversation, then what would be your key thing each of you would offer our podcast listeners as a thing to take away, to practice or think about as far as being present is concerned?
It's just got to be find what works for you, would be my summary. It's got you find, play, explore. Everyone's very different. Some people are more visual, like clearing the space, putting stuff in a balloon. Others want to physically clear the space. So I think it's about finding, for me, what works. Explore, play.
And mine's a physical, as in me, physical, so my body, so breathing, relaxing, my posture, all of those things help signal to me that I'm moving into a different space as well. So I definitely focus a lot of time and attention around that.
I'd echo both of those two, and again what we've already said, that reflection piece, the reflection piece afterwards as to what's gone on, what are the common themes, what can you do with that. Also encourage as coachees to reflect as well, for that, maybe to encourage that in them after the session. What's kind of come up, what do they maybe notice in between the sessions? But I think that reflection piece is really important, and taking that time to reflect, and then looking at those reflections before as well, and thinking, how can I use that and take that into this session?
And I guess the final thing I would say, inspired by that passage in Coactive that I read about giving yourself a break, basically, what I think another one of the triggers can be in the middle of a coaching session, self-judgment as well. Overanalyzing, is this going well? So I guess my counsel, for what it's worth, would be make sure that you are reflecting, but make sure it's constructive and not self-destructive, as far as yes, I may have got distracted there, but it'll not happen next time, because it's just another experience as far as your practice is concerned. So cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.